we've heard all the way through the conference is what it is icons do, what the effects of the icons are, what the outcome of iconography is, but nobody has yet talked about how they work. How does all that happen? Right? And so that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about how it works. Right? And it's a rather important subject because how it works makes all the difference between whether we view icons as some kind of unique transcendental object in the world, right? Or whether we think that the way icons work is the way we work, and the unique transcendental object in the world is in fact us, not the icons. And that's my overriding theme for this talk. Since we're going to get rather down into the nitty-gritty very quickly, I thought I would at the beginning summarize the points I would like to establish with this talk. So there are 5 of them. First of all, the way icons work is as a language. What I'm going to be introducing you to a lot, especially at the beginning here, is the grammar of the icon. And as a language, as a grammar, icons are in fact open to anyone. I have many non-believing, outright atheist colleagues in the art history world who understand icons perfectly well, know how they work, can explain them quite adequately and in the orthodox manner, have a good insight into the orthodox mind. Right? So the grammar is not enough to make an icon, that's for sure. Right? And all the commentators on icons say this. They distinguish, quote unquote, I'm quoting Uspensky in this case, the real icon from just the work of art. The difficulty, as you'll hear later in the talk, is that people like Uspensky think that's something intrinsic in the icon, whereas it is not. Ontologically speaking, phenomenologically speaking as well, an icon is nothing but a work of art. That's what it is. It's a picture, painted, done in mosaic, done in glass, done in sculpture, done in wood, done in copper, done in a whole lot of media, right? By an artist. That's what an icon is, as a physical object. And as such, it's accessible to everybody. It's open to everybody. I'm going to be using an orthodox key phrase here, a patristic key phrase here, that iconology, which is the orthodox grasp of what an icon is. Now, did you hear me carefully? I did not say what an icon is. I said the orthodox grasp of what an icon is, right, requires using the eyes of the body to inform the eyes of the mind so that the eyes of the heart can see. The eyes of the heart. And many of you will recognize that as in fact taken directly from Ephesians 1:18. Right? Well, at the grammatical level, the eyes of the body can inform the eyes of the mind. Anybody can do that. Right? It's the eyes of the heart that are in question here. And I remind you that there are many other kinds of grasp of the icon than the orthodox one. Right? They are objects of commerce, they are museum pieces, they are subjects of study in the art historical world. There's a lot of different grasps of what the icons are. Historians use them too for other purposes. Second point. If we start to think iconologically instead of iconographically, an icon is a language of insight. And that's a very key patristic word, insight. Notice it's about us. It's about us, right? Icons are didactic. Icons are homiletic. They're the exact equivalent in the visual realm of what a homily or a sermon is in the preaching realm. Right? Aimed at the same purposes too. Icons are catechetical. They educate us, they elevate us. Right? That's what the grammar works to do. In order to do this, icons have to have another aspect of language besides straightforward grammar, straightforward rules. They have to have rhetoric. We all know the difference between a good preacher and a bad preacher, don't we? Admit it. And the difference is in the rhetoric, right? If each has the same quantity, the same amount, the same passion of soul, then the difference between the good preacher and the bad preacher is ability to persuade. That's what rhetoric is. Ability to persuade, to use the tools of language such that the effect is persuasive. Now, if we start to think this way about the pastoral functions of icons, liturgical functions of icons, we are approaching the divide between the believer and the non-believer. The believer cares about these things. For the non-believer, this function of the icon is just sociological information. It's evidence, nothing more. The believer thinks, yes, when I encounter, again, notice, when I encounter the icon, I am able to gain insight, insight's in here, not out there, insight into truth. Right? At the end, I will point out, in response to many questions that have been asked, that style is part of the rhetoric. Third point, icons are a liturgical art. Now, we've heard this from practically everybody. Bishop Callistos, Father Taft both emphasized that Orthodox can't pray without icons, always praying in front of icons, and this makes the full divide. When what you learn from the icon is an inspiration to prayer, we have entered the realm of the eyes of the heart. The eyes of the body, the eyes of the mind have informed the eyes of the heart. At this point, all those tools of the icon, the grammar, the rhetoric, and so on, start to tell us who we really are. And when we have iconographic programs, they also tell us where we are and pretty much what we're supposed to do there. I repeat, this is not inherent in the icon. This is a constructed result of the creation of the icon, of the way the icon's created. And that means the message is going to be different every single time, and it's going to be different for every single viewer, worshiper, user, end user of the icon. Does that make us all individuals? No, because as Orthodox, we operate socially. We operate in community. We operate within the tradition, right? We operate with the mind of the church. So even though everyone's going to have a personal contact with an icon, the end result, as always in Orthodoxy, is going to be ecclesial, and hence liturgical. Fourth point, which is the key to everything I've just said. Participation is what makes some work of art into an icon. It is the engagement between us and the object that creates the 3 points I've just spoken about, especially the third one. If there is no such participation, if there's no engagement, if what we're dealing with is some kind of rational analysis, we will not have an icon, we will have an object of study. Okay? And it is also not correct to say, as by and large the traditional iconological writers say, that the icon will be an icon whether we engage or not. It is not inherent, right? If we are not orthodox, there is no orthodoxy, no matter how many churches remain standing. Right? A modern way to speak about this kind of participation is the viewer's share, right? That we have to take part in the iconological speaking of the icon. The experience of the icon is hermeneutic from start to finish. It is always exegetical, interpretative, hermeneutic. This is why there can be no dictionaries. First thing I make the seminarians do when I start the course, we have a big book burning on the lawn, all the dictionaries of symbols. Right? There were several questions, for example, what does this mean? What does that mean? You'll see in a few minutes why that question can't be answered. Right? There are no dictionaries. Tradition was not graven in stone in the 8th century and remained there ever since. And this, of course, also speaks to the idea of whether one can have new thoughts. Can one have new thoughts theologically? Can one have new thoughts liturgically? Can one have new thoughts iconographically? Of course one can. The world moves on. All right? Finally, the conclusion of all this is that through the iconological experience, icons are transcendental. What they are not is mystical. Right? They are not neither themselves objects of mystical radiance, nor is our experience of them a mystical entry into the world of the icon. Okay, those are the points I want to make. Let's start making them in detail now, which means it's time to turn out the lights. So I hope everybody had a good night's sleep last night. And we'll have the first 2 slides, please. So let's start simply. Let's start with what the grammar is. Just how does the icon speak? The first and most fundamental element in this grammar, right? I feel very old-fashioned teaching you grammar first. It's in modern linguistics, you're supposed to teach the experience, of the language, and then you teach grammar. And I remind you that one of the medieval iconographic types for teaching grammar was beating people with a stick. But I'm kind of an old-fashioned guy. What was called in Latin figura was called in Greek usually schema, sometimes morphe. So you could say schematic. Form would be a very good translation of this. Right? One recognizes forms, and form is a transferable quality also. So if we start with a basic iconographic figure, the one that you're quite familiar with, this is the dogmatic icon called the Pantocrator, Christ as Lord of the world. We see in it a basic form, frontal figure, right hand making a gesture, it's a gesture of blessing, right? Left hand holding a book, could be open, could be closed. These little elements like the book are called attributes, and there are other attributes, and they're part of recognizing the figure. Some attributes are unique to one personage, the figure of one personage. So you notice that the halo behind Christ's head has a cross in it, right? Usually also has the Greek words ho on, the existing one, he who is. These are unique to Christ. You would not see them in a figure of anybody else. So they identify, right, the personage as Christ. That can be extremely important, because what you notice in this image on the right, that's an image of St. Nicholas, is that the figura and its attributes are transferable. You can interpret a second personage, a second figure, by giving that personage the design of a well-known figure. And because Nicholas is a bishop, one of the key ways of portraying him is as if he were the Pantocrator, but again, there is differentiation. So the fact that he's a bishop is shown by the vestment that he's wearing, rather than by having the attributes of Christ. But he too is full frontal, making the same gesture, holding the book. The figure's been transferred. Now, in addition to that, you notice that the figure of Nicholas is surrounded all the way around the margin. There's a sense of position and place. Right? So he's surrounded all the way around the margin by little scenes. This is the kind of thing we heard from Father Cherovsky. And if we look at those scenes, we notice that they're quite different aesthetically from the extremely severe, fully frontal, staring right at you Nicholas. Right? There are two broad modes of expression in iconographic design. One is called hieratic, and that's what Nicholas is. Hieratic is a design of extreme formalism. If we were moving up to the level of meaning, we'd say it has a timeless quality. Right? It connotes not the moment, but an eternal situation. The other kind of aesthetic presentation is called narrative, and it works the way our experience of life works, the way history works. It tells the story in fleeting moments. Little bit invidious, you could almost compare it to a comic strip, but the essential thing about it is that it is rooted in time. Right? And we experience the narrative the same way we experience life. Right? Whereas the hieratic figure conveys to us the quality that we will experience that figure forever. You notice how the one is played off against the other here. And what's in those little scenes in this case is the life of Nicholas, the story of his life. Now, that means that what we're discovering is that Nicholas is a saint both eternally, but in his life too he was a saint. That's what it means to tell a saint's life. It's called hagiography. Right? So we get two different statements of Nicholas as saint. You'll notice that this is done by designing the icon in order. There are significant positions. The margins are one position, the center is another position. The hieratic, the eternal, is placed in the center as a position of more importance. The narrative is placed around the outside, right, as a kind of comment on the hieratic. But the two play against each other. This is the kind of thing Father Taft was discussing when he talked about the necessity of taxis or order. And every icon, no matter how strange looking, is always composed with an underlying sense of taxis. It's part of the grammar. Right? In fact, if you'll note, what I'm doing is actually following Father Robert's 3 steps. We're starting with taxis, then we're going to move to historia, then we're going to move into theoria. Right? Works exactly as he described it. Finally, obviously there's a link between these two. The transfer of the figure wouldn't work if we weren't able to remember the Pantocrator when we looked at the Nicholas. That's called recension. And recension is a very important element of tradition. Right? Because of recension, tradition is possible. But I want to emphasize right here and now, recension is not slavish copy. Right? Recension is that sense of basic form figure that is portable from one situation to another. Thus, we have a number of icons of Nicholas, and they'd be in what's called a recension. But you notice how you can modify the recension by this time changing what's in the margins. So this one, this is the oldest portrait of Nicholas we know. It's late 10th or 11th century. Has saints in the margin instead of Nicholas's life. And so the message that we derive when we start using the eyes of our mind is different. Now it's Nicholas, you know, the main figure because it's his day or because he's the patron saint or some such reason, within the synaxis or the communion of saints. As Father Robert told us, a very key phrase that runs throughout the liturgy. And the saints are arranged in a taxis too. So along the sides we have 4 military saints, but along the bottom we have 3 healing saints. So the saints are grouped by their functions. Right? Gesture matters too. We recognize Nicholas as the type of the Pantocrator because with his right hand he is making that gesture of blessing. And leaping ahead to the liturgical point, you all know that this is a gesture that is made during the liturgy, primarily by bishops, occasionally by priests. Right? So it's a liturgical gesture as well. Just one further example of recension, the idea that you can use the position of the margins to create a synaxis of saints can get transferred from one subject matter to another subject matter. So here is a crucifixion from Mount Sinai, surrounded by saints, and they too are in an important taxis or order, which I won't explain here. It's rather complicated, but it's very clear. And the idea here then is that the cross is the foundation of the church, that from the cross spring all of the saints. Pursuing gesture just a little bit, you'll notice how composition and arrangement depend on slight changes of gesture, and we can begin to introduce rhetoric too. And as a result, they introduce what's called ethos and pathos. So here we have a mosaic icon of about 1200 from Mount Sinai of a very standard type called the Hodegetria. It's the formal dogmatic icon, the one that goes with the Pantocrator most usually to establish the fundamental dogmas of the faith. This is the type that's being painted in the conference icon here by St. Luke, right? Because there is hagiography to say that St. Luke actually posed the Virgin this way and painted her. The earliest examples date back to the 11th century. But now, the famous Vladimir Virgin, also a Greek icon from the early 12th century, and you notice the change. It's one of the most startling theological changes in all iconography. The child's face actually touches his mother's face. And moving right up to Father Robert's Theoria, I'm going to be in about a second, what this means is that the interface between God and man has become intimate. God actually touches man. Right? Perhaps no surprise that this belongs to the kind of culture that produced Simeon the New Theologian and some others. It's a really big breakthrough, big change. And it introduces an element of what in rhetoric is called pathos, that is, interior feelings on our part, to accompany the ethos, that is, who are these people? What is their quality? What is their character? Taxis and ordo. Let's have the next one here too. This one just shows how you can carry things in extreme times to extremes. Right. This is an illustration then of both ethos and pathos at the same time. It's two examples of the icon called the Miracle at Chonai, where Michael saves the monastery of a monk from destruction by a flood caused by the pagans. Now, the one on the left is 13th century from Sinai. The one on the right is 1500, more or less, from Patmos. You can see the recension quite clearly. You can see the increase in manipulation of the two figures in the Patmos example for a maximization of pathos. My art historian friends would say this is some kind of evolution, stylistic evolution, but I would say no, this is a choice. Each one represents a rhetorical choice. But the important thing is the bowed figura of the monk and the erect, strong figure of the angel in both cases convey the same message, the ethos of who this angel is as protector, which is what the legend says, right? And the humility of the monk, the beseecher. Fundamental to the idea of taxis or ordo is what we might call the underlying grid of an icon. And all icons, I repeat, all icons have this underlying grid. The underlying grid creates zones and positions. The grid is a central vertical, right? And as we heard from Father Cherovsky, with an implied symmetry on both sides, and then somewhere, not in a fixed position, a horizontal. And that creates an upper zone and a lower zone. And then comes the composition, because now one has an upper zone, a lower zone, and four quadrants, four corners as zones. And now the programmer, the person who decides what the content of the icon is going to be, right, and its basic design, is able to use that grid to make compositions that will have theological effect. By the way, historically, that person was not the icon painter. Historically, that person was a theologian. The icon painter was a craftsman, sort of like the person who fixes your plumbing. It's only in modern times that we've come up with the idea, it's a post-romantic idea following the romantic notion of the artist, that the icon painter should know everything. Should be theologian, programmer, designer, sociologist of the place that has paid for the icon, and also skilled artist, all in once. It's asking a lot. So you'll notice particularly in this ivory, 10th century ivory of the 40 martyrs of Sebaste, how the upper zone and the lower zone are strongly divided, and some of the grammar we've been talking about is used to differentiate the moment of freezing to death of the 40 martyrs. Absolutely narrative. No two of the figures are alike in their postures. And the absolute order and symmetry of the upper zone, the heavenly zone where Christ is. Right? It's part of the theological grammar of the icon. The problem of Taxis or Ordo can get you sometimes into trouble. The icon of the Communion of the Apostles, this is on a paten of the 10th century. The icon of the Communion of the Apostles has only really two possible designs, because you have an absolute symmetry of 6 apostles this side and 6 apostles that side. How are you going to cope with this? And the only two possibilities are for an absolutely hieratic Christ who is giving communion to both sides at the same time, the way it is at St. Vladimir Seminary, or the solution here, where you have two Christs, one giving communion on the left and one giving communion on the right, and this raises theological difficulties for you. So you see, the thinking that goes into this is quite difficult, right? Quite complicated. Having established that there is a basic order, the programmer and the painter can now play paradoxically against it. It's possible to deepen your rhetoric by introducing elements of paradox, and as Father Taft would be the first to tell us, or Father Mark, this is one of the things the liturgy does in spades. Our liturgy, which by the way works exactly the way this iconography works, it's a poetry, right, uses all these poetic tools of rhetoric, paradox included. We're very fond of paradox. So this icon tells a story in the upper register, right? It's a narrative story, and it's in the bottom register that you see the hieratic figures, and they're smaller. So it reverses the order of the 40 martyrs ivory. Story at the top is the story of Abgar. This is the first illustration of the Holy Face, 10th century. It's from Mount Sinai, and as such, it's an important signifier validating iconography right after the iconoclast controversy. Who are the figures at the bottom? Monastic saints, validating the place that owned this icon, right? And they mix both Orient, I'm sorry Father Daniel's not here, because they mix both Oriental and Byzantine saints. But also it shows the various aspects of the monastic life. Some are dressed in their daily monastic garb. Others, also monks, are dressed prepared for the liturgy. So the liturgy is still very important here. I could illustrate all of this, by the way, with the icon of the conference. The idea of figura. We have Luke here as painter. Well, the significance of the point of this icon is to show the significance of iconography. Luke as painter is in the figure of a gospel writer, an evangelist. He's sitting in the chair, but instead of a desk with paper and pens in front of him, he has instead a paint pot, a paint grinder. Those are the attributes, and he has a brush in his hand. But the posture, the figure, it's exactly like Pantocrator and Nicholas, is that of the gospel writer. You can't miss it. Right? And the same sense of paradox is here too. The central theological subject of this icon is the Mother of God. But that's the smallest figure. The icon painter is the big figure. Remember Father Charovsky's lecture, right? Well, we're playing with that hierarchy of size in a paradoxical way. Want to be very careful you don't misunderstand the idea of pathos, because we still have the word today, and the word today leads us to all kinds of sloppy sentimentalism. So I want to remind you that this is a rhetorical term, right? Both ethos and pathos are persuasive arguments, as is everything in rhetoric. Right? And ethos appeals to our judgment. It appeals to our evaluation of who the subject being discussed is. Pathos appeals to our interior response. What if this were happening to me? This is very important. This is why pathos is very important. What if I were that figure? Right? But it's not a kind of empathetic feeling. It's a kind of judgment. And pathos is a form of proof in rhetoric. Form of proof. I want to introduce here a rather important idea. It's a little bit of a modification of something Father Daniel said. It's not a change, but a modification. And I want to give credit where credit is due. I was taught this by one of my former pupils last night. And she's out there somewhere, named Jutta Reitel, if you want to talk to her about it. Historia, Father Daniel was absolutely right. It isn't about what happened in the real world, if that's what we mean by the real world. Historia is the story. And it can be about a story that is plausible, a story that is historically factual, or a story that is a good story. That's what the word means. But, as Jutta told me, historia and mythos are not synonyms. And a mythos is a story that we know is not plausible, whereas an historia requires assent. As a word, she's just talking about the use of the words in Greek. Historia requires assent. In that sense, icons are all historia. No myth here, no matter how inventive, no matter how much play, no matter how much pathos is involved. The object is that you say, yes, I am looking at the truth. Right? And the first image we saw is the truth of all icons, the Pantocrator. And somehow we have to relate all other icons to that Pantocrator. One of the functions of taxis in big programs is to arrange, in well-ordered big programs, is to arrange the icons so that we will unmistakably concentrate on Christ as the focus of the whole program. So one of the classic examples of a great increase in pathos in the 12th century is this image on the left from Nerevci in former Yugoslavia. This is the image that is always published, this sort of cutout piece that shows how sad it was, right? And if we are romantic Orthodox, we will all at this point shed not tears of the heart, but tears of the soap opera. Right? So we have to remember that this piece belongs in a context which is rarely photographed, very, very hard to see pictures of. And it's a context something like the one on the right, where you notice the same image exists. That's one of the churches in Castoria from just about the same date. And you see how this scene, the burial of Christ, it's called the Threnos, right, is part of a large-scale program that has a rather wonderful ordo, or taxis, which I haven't time to spell out for you right now, right? Because I want to move on to my next point. My next point is that iconography is there to appeal to intellect. It is didactic in intent. Now, again, I hasten to say I don't mean the intellect of lofty ivory tower types. For some bizarre reason, the world pays people like Father Robert and myself to write those great big books with all those footnotes and everything, right? But that's not what the Orthodox understand by intellect. Intellect is the mind's road to God. And the function of all intellection, including, I add, writing those great big books, is to reach out. Knowledge is fundamentally homiletic, and that's why conferences like Lumen Orientale are really rather glorious, because they aren't just for the recherché few, they're for all of us. And so it feels a little bit like church gathered here. And may I hasten to point out that we have in the room, when I say that, Orthodox, Eastern Catholics, Roman Catholics, and probably some others too. And I repeat, it feels like church gathered here. So let's see how intellection works, how this grammar of intellect works. So one of the key issues, it's been skirted in all the talks, nobody's ever said it right out loud, I was rather surprised, is that it's about time. Fundamentally, this play-off of the hieratic and the narrative creates a play-off that is eschatological. It's about time working in storia and eternity, right? Working in the eschatological meaning, the absolute meaning of that story. The challenge of the icon, where the icon leads you, is not to some mystical space, but to figuring that out. And you do it by starting where this lecture started, and you work your way up. And then comes the great aha, and the great aha is what Bernard Lonergan called insight, right? And I attribute it to Bernard Lonergan because everybody's forgotten to read that wonderful book. But in fact, it's the fathers who said this. And I could quote both Eastern and Western fathers, Augustine, Basil, any number of such fathers. That's what we mean by an insight, right? And then the end result of insight is, of course, conversion. Save me, O Lord. One of the tools of this intellection is what's called text and gloss. The image is a text. I hope that's been made clear by now, that when you look at these visual objects, it's just the same as if you were hearing the words of the liturgy, reading the words of Scripture. The reason Christ the Pantocrator holds a book is because he is the Word, right? And then you can gloss it. It can either be the closed book, and then you have to decide what book it is, what word he is, or it can be an open book, and you can change the text all the time. And what text the programmer chooses to put in there is the gloss that gives the thrust of that icon. And there's any number of choices. I am the way, the truth, and the life, right? You have not called me, but I have called you, and so on and so on, right? It's about reading the text, but reading it exegetically. Orthodox always read the text with its inner meaning. I want you to notice the recension here, right? So what was an image constructed to, and this is a brand new image. This is almost the first case of this image. Brand new image constructed because somebody had an insight into the pathos of Christ's death on the cross. They wanted to make that death real, right? Can then be incorporated into the liturgy. This is a familiar liturgical object, the epitaphion, and in the process of incorporating it, an entire liturgical structure is developing. All of this is happening at the time when the Good Friday liturgy is developing. So you see how these are all one, and I am slightly looking ahead to the idea that it is a liturgical art, but having created the object, one can then see that as the new text and then expand on that. So here we have the epitaphion image, right, of the dead Christ. Notice the taxis, by the way. Right? Christ hieratically would be upright. So by making him be the horizontal, right, you have made the death absolutely clear, unmistakable. You see? That's how it works. But then, and this is from the 14th century, out in the two margins are put the two halves of the communion of the apostles. And so the eschatology of Christ's death, right, is brought out, the saving eschatology in which communion, Eucharist, right, is part of what the pathos of the death of Christ on Good Friday means. That's how text and gloss works. It's really quite exciting. And this can get quite exegetically complex. These are two different sets of holy doors. Mount Sinai has like a room full of these things. They've got so much stuff there. They're both from Mount Sinai. Neither one in place anymore. And the one on the left is 13th century, and it's kind of basic, although already it's a text and gloss situation. Why would you put Moses and Aaron on holy doors? You see, there's a challenge there. The iconography makes you think. It appeals to intellect. But then the one on the right takes the challenge a whole step further. Notice the recension. Moses is holding the tablets of the law on the left, 13th century. In the 15th century one, the tablets of the law have become horizontal, so they've become a table, and on the table are the Eucharistic vessels. So the old law has become the new law. So yet another exegetical step based on the first exegetical step. You see how it works, right? It's a never-ending process. This is why there's no dictionary. It's a never-ending process, but the process is not anything strange or arcane or unique to iconography. It's exactly what's going on in the rest of church life. It's just going on in the domain of and in the language and grammar of the visual. That's all. My art historian friends would say this is an evolution, right? I think it's just the process that's been going on since the days of the catacombs. This means that what in the grammatical level was just attributes, something like attributes, at this intellectual level we are moving into what Father Robert called theoria, become signs, signifiers. And I use the word exactly the way the church fathers who wrote on hermeneutics used it, St. Augustine, St. Basil, and so on. Right? So, in this very, very early pre-iconoclast crucifix from Mount Sinai on the left, you notice that Christ is on the cross, but he's fully vertical and erect, and his eyes are open. He's not dead. That's an attempt at a signifier, an attempt at showing that the cross is not the end, or if you like, of putting together 1 Corinthians chapter 1 with 1 Corinthians chapter 15 into one and the same icon. One of the great things about iconography is that it can do that. The one on the right is much more narrative, but you notice that it introduces the vessel to catch Christ's blood. It's a signifier of Eucharist. Or in these two examples of Pentecost, one from Mount Athos, one from Mount Sinai. And you notice that both of them have the same ordo and taxis of the apostles. And another thing that came out in discussion last night is quite fascinating. This is the typological fulfillment of the Tower of Babel. But the many tongues at Babel destroyed human harmony and community, whereas at Pentecost, even though they were all speaking different tongues, one message, one truth, one harmony is restored. But you notice the little figure in the black center, figure of the world or cosmos, and he's present one time and he's not present another time. Right? These are choices by the programmer. They're free choices. Hence, iconography is a hermeneutic art, and we certainly heard that from Father Chorowski with his analysis of the three angels in the Rublev iconography. Fourth point, the context is liturgical. If you look at these examples of the anastasis icon, the icon of the resurrection, everything we've been saying is quite clear. They are figuratively rather different, although both belong clearly to the same recension. Right? In the one on the left, from the Cora Church in Constantinople, Christ is holding Adam with one hand and Eve with another hand. In the one on the right, which is from Mount Athos, Christ is holding Adam by the hand and Eve is standing behind him with her hands in prayer. So, play on the recension, right? If we look at them long enough and do a figurative analysis, and by now from what I've told you, you're quite capable of doing this, the way into that analysis doesn't just come from strictly visual ratiocination, it comes from the liturgy. Listen to this text, you've heard it. Though thou didst descend into the grave, O deathless one, yet thou didst annihilate the power of hell, and didst rise again as conqueror. So you notice the power of hell is annihilated, right? O Christ God, announcing unto the myrrh-bearing women, rejoice, and giving peace to thine apostles, and bestowing resurrection on the fallen. Now you put that together with this text. It's from 1 Corinthians. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed is death, for God has put all things in subjection under his feet. You see that? And so those are the gates of hell under his feet and the bars and bolts that are broken down. The fact that it's placed under his feet, this sort of trampling posture, comes directly from the figurative imagery of the text and other such texts, such as Psalm 90, verse 13, and so on. But now one can intellectually take it a step further, and we have this very unique icon from Mount Sinai, where you notice he touches no one, right? And in fact is floating in space, but what he's doing is showing the wounds in his hands. So the cross becomes the redeeming action that makes the triumph over hell and resurrection, the name of the icon is anastasis, possible. All of this requires action, requires participation on our part, right? And that's, here we who make a procession with this epitaphios relate to the painted angels on the wall who make a procession with the epitaphios. That one was in there to show you that this very strange anastasis icon, it's a rare type, is in fact part of a liturgical cycle. We have to think in terms of liturgical time too. It's part of the ordo, part of the text. The living iconography is part of the iconographic program. Some of the most important figures in the iconography are what are the people, or what's going on with the people. This is a sakos made in the 14th century and worked on in the 15th century of the Metropolitan of Russia. And what he's wearing on his sakos is the liturgical year. So the liturgical year is not just in an iconographic series of pictures like the one I just showed, but it's also on the people, and it's moving about among them in 3 dimensions, right? It's all action. Participation is fundamentally important. This connects up with our point about time, right? To connect eternity and the present, and that's how eschatology works. This is Hagios Demetrios in Thessaloniki, right? And the iconography we're looking at is from the repair of the church in the 17th century, in the early 7th century. This gives you a view looking east down the nave, and some of the iconography is synaxis of saints, as you'd expect. That's the Virgin and St. Theodore. We also have images like this, and we know they're intentional because they're in mosaic, right? They'd be very hard to change. Oh, sorry, it's in sideways, but the 2 fellows with square halos are alive. They're living people, right, in the company of St. Demetrios. He's standing there with them. And we even know who they are. The bishop is named John, right, and the other is the prefect of the province. His name was Leontius. And on their same pillar is a nameless deacon, but that's what you'd expect. You'd expect the bishop to be led by a deacon. So the living action that took place in the church by these people is portrayed on the wall in the mural iconography, together with the presence of eternity. And so we're being told in this place eschatology works. And so we come to one of the most familiar elements of an iconographic program, the fact that you have Christ, Pantocrator, in the dome over the nave. Right? This is Hagia Sophia in Thessaloniki. And it's an icon that was created right after the iconoclast controversy. Right? Now normally, this is an interesting paradox, because normally what you have is a bust of Christ, just a Pantocrator bust. And people always ask, why? Where's the rest of him? Where's his body? Well, his body is standing on the floor, right underneath. And Christ is the head, and we are the body, right? As Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, but he says even more effectively in Ephesians chapter 1. Says it very forcefully. We're the body. We make the iconography work. We make it happen. But this one's a paradox. It's a whole body. Why? Because if you look at it, the figure is not just Pantocrator, it's the Ascension. There are 2 angels supporting him. So the Ascension has been placed in the dome, and therefore it's eschatologically leading us onward. And this means that it's all about choices. I explicated this at some length in Istanbul. Here I can just mention it. The central church of the Kora in Istanbul, the cross and square church that you see in the middle, is a 12th century church, right? But the 14th century patron built all that other stuff around it. And the iconography is designed to create various alternative pathways, and which iconographic program you choose to work out leads you on one pathway or another, and each pathway has a different spiritual purpose. So the mosaic pathway would lead you straight into the church for Eucharist, but the fresco pathway would lead you around to the side, right? Pausing to do penance first, and then going into the very side chapel, which is a funerary chapel. And what would you see when you got in there? Lo and behold, the resurrection, the one we saw before. There it is in context, you see, and where better for the resurrection to be than in a funerary chapel? Gaze is very important. We heard that from Father Andri's analysis of the Rublev Trinity. You see it here too. It's very important. Look at Luke. If you use your hand to block off his head, first of all, you will give the lie to one of the hoariest cliches in the iconography books, that is that saints are never painted in profile. He's in total profile, right? But then you look at the head, and that's the paradox. The head is not in profile. The head is turned, and it is looking at you. It's engaging you. It's asking you to recognize the significance of this icon, right? To take the viewer's share. I'll now pass over. I can kind of feel Bishop Callistos behind me, actually. With a single remark, the notion that you've got to burn all the rest of the books too. Iconology, as I hope I've demonstrated to you, is not a mystical art. The books, unfortunately, have their roots in a period of Orthodox revival in Russia that was intensely pro-hesychast, fairly sophiological, certainly Neoplatonic, and saw the icon as some kind of unique ideal object, different from all other art. And okay, those guys, Florensky and Uspensky and so on, belong to their time. They are icons of their own time. Uspensky's book is still, I guess, the best book around on theology of the icon, despite being chock-a-block with this opinion. I mean, it's got a lot of very good information in it, and then it's wrong-headed root and branch. The real harm has been done by all the popular books that picked up from this and made this into the common cliche, but without any kind of deep reflection, such as these people had. And what we have now is a kind of romantic sentimentalism about how icons reach out to us, and an even worse, a more dangerous sentimentalism that says unless you're in a perfect spiritual state, and by the way, unless the painter was in a perfect spiritual state too, it's not going to work, and you're not going to relate to the icon, and you've got to be absolutely pure, right? Well, you can see God in an icon while you're smoking a cigarette. You really can. Right? But I'd like to close with a last observation about style. The next pair, please. This is in response to a lot of questions that were asked. Right? Iconologically, while in a very detailed, a really nuanced analysis, style would be part of the iconological analysis, and that means we must bring in the historical context. Each icon is made for its period and its patron. But theologically, there is very little difference between these two icons. One is early 19th century, and by the way, it's used as the dogmatic icon in St. Isaac's, the one on the, I keep getting turned around. The viewers left of the Holy Doors. Okay? The other is Cretan and comes from the late 14th century. Right? They even belong to the same recension. The significant difference between them is style. The problems come not from style. The problems come not from the style. Let's remember that maybe 80% of Orthodox iconography in front of which people pray looks like this. The problem comes from an iconography that becomes dogmatically false. What's wrong with the one on the right is certainly the coronation of the Virgin. That's a Western dogma that doesn't exist in Orthodoxy. And then there's a problematic iconography, which is the New Testament Trinity. That's another whole lecture. Okay? That's the problem. There's nothing wrong with innovation. Right? Nothing wrong with innovation. On the left is a 3rd century sarcophagus showing the old ancient figura of the Good Shepherd. On the right is a 20th century Greek icon. And there's a startling innovation in it, which you can all see. Is it theologically a brilliant insight that brings us further into the need for compassion? The Orthodox in Toronto, one small group of Orthodox in Toronto actually created a soup kitchen. Glory to God, right? The rest don't even know there are poor people in Toronto. This leads to the question from the last pair and this pair, what is realism? Right? There's been a lot of talk about realism. Here is where Ouspensky has really, really led us wrong. I even brought the page to show you. It's not a page of words. It's 2 pictures that he puts side by side. See, there they are. Orthodox icon, good. Raphael, evil. Right? He really did not understand this at all. And it's, in fact, an aesthetic rather than an iconological judgment. Realism, right? In art is a style. In life, it's facing up to the truth. Icons intend to face us up to the truth. Right? Next pair. And very briefly, the idea of gospel and culture. The icon must speak to the culture for which it's going to be used. These are both painted by students of mine. They're both of the same person, Mother Olga, who is a Yupik Indian. The painter on the left is a traditionalist. So she painted Mother Olga to make her look something like a Russian babushka, right? And totally hieratic. The painter on the right studied for a year, went up to the Arctic Circle, painted Mother Olga to look like a Yupik Indian, and for the heavenly light, which the painter on the left showed in the traditional gold, the painter on the right used the Canadian Northern Lights, the characteristic of the Arctic, as the heavenly light. This is brilliance. Innovation, sure it is, but it's brilliance. And the next on the left, please. And yet, you notice it is absolutely traditional. My innovative student's Mother Olga is holding the traditional implements of the healer's craft because Mother Olga was a midwife. This is a 14th century icon. So we end with the idea of a mirror, not a door. A door is a very good image because things pass both ways through doors. It's a very good image. Certainly beats that old window one. That one should be deep sixed forever. Don't ever tell anybody an icon is a window on eternity. There is the ontological eternity out there is not interested in coming through your window. It's interested in coming through the eyes of your body, to the eyes of your mind, to the eyes of your heart. It's interested in you bringing it into the world. Right? Door is not too bad. If you will remember, and this was missing from Bishop Kallistos' talk, that a door only works if you push it. Then it works. Mirror. Ouspensky hated the idea of mirror. Yeah, but in fact, it's all over St. Paul. Look at Romans 8:17. Right? He quotes Simon Ushakov in the 17th century for this idea of mirror, for being responsible for bringing all that realism hot gooey. Right? The mirror of all this iconology I've been showing you is you. The most perfect icon of God is you. Genesis 1:26. Follow a series very quickly. From the man of sorrows to a double-sided icon, which includes the Hodegetria, holding the Christ child, and the man of sorrows, right? And we all know there's an icon of the Mother of God holding the dead Christ, called Do Not Lament Me, O Mother. Now the next on the left, to this. And this is us. The ultimate proof of the resurrection is not the appearances, it's the empty tomb. It's where the Gospel of Mark originally ended. And we have to say the great amen. And if we don't, we can go on being rational and thinking and being intellectuals, but we will not be believers. I urge you to look at Romans 12:2. Half the books you look at will tell you that Romans 12:2 says it's about metanoia, changing your mind. It is not what the Greek says. It says metamorphosis, change your form. And it's an exact response to Philippians 2, where Christ changes his form to be like us. That's why we can paint him. And the next on the right, which is the last one. And while you're looking at these two icons, I would like you to do something. I would like you to reach out and take firm hold of the hand of somebody sitting near you. But keep your eyes fixed on the icon. Everybody do it. No exceptions. Okay, reach out, take somebody's hand. Hard. But you're looking at the icon. It's teaching you how to do this. It's teaching you how to do this. If you let go, the person whose hand you're holding dies. We all live by holding each other's hands. Now, look deep into the eyes of someone whose hand you're holding. Do it. Deep into the eyes. And now you have seen the icon of Christ.